Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends and colleagues. A warm welcome to this event, which is on the one hand the presentation of our first occasional paper, a publication on transitional justice experiences in Germany after the Second World War, after 1945, and after 1990, after the reunification. First of all, you are all aware that this is a very historic place, so more than apt and emblematic for speaking about these matters, the place where the biggest and most important of the Nazi criminals were sentenced, first by the International Military Tribunal, later by American courts. Second, I should explain why I'm speaking English, while the vast majority, the panelists are all Germans, and more than half of the participants are German speaking. The main reason is, of course, the non-German speaking third of the participants, plus the issue that we are going to register this discussion, and we would like to put it on our website later. Our academy has the aim of influencing and supporting debates on international criminal law and on transitional justice in conflict and post-conflict countries. So this is the area where we want to get our messages across to, and so the film we are going to make, or the registration of this event, will be part of that. First of all, our publication. The publication has a bit of a history. I will just mention 3-4 words, as I've seen that there are people here who have an idea about Albania, so I tell about it. I used to be German ambassador in Albania from 2007 to 2010, and I was there invited to speak about German experiences in dealing with the past after the Second World War and after the communist dictatorship. And it took me a long time to get that all together in bits and pieces. And so I realized that it would be a good idea to have that all in a comprehensive manner and to get a good overview, which gives those in countries dealing with their own past a glimpse on that what we have been doing. Plus, with a very large bibliography, the possibility to find interesting literature which cover other aspects or which cover in a much deeper and profound way the German way of dealing with the past after 45 and after 1990. First thing to do is now to welcome here Sanya Romeike, a young historian who was at Kiel University. Please stand up briefly, and who has written the publication for us. And she concentrated at our wish on the criminal dealings, the criminal justice part of dealing with the past, on the, let's call it the civil justice part, reparations, compensations, return of stolen property, etc., the change of elites, and the memorial culture. Criminal justice also encompasses the political steps taken to avoid reoccurrence of dictatorships, wars, etc. But we realize that dealing with that what we call in German Westeinbindung, the binding of Germany into Western Germany into the Western alliances, would have widely broken the limits of this publication. So we limited ourselves to these four chapters. After my welcome words, I will sit here on the podium together with two highly reputed colleagues from Friends Institutes, which are in a similar way, which are working on other aspects, but on similar aspects we are working on. First, ladies first, it's Dr. Anna Kaminsky. Mrs. Kaminsky is has, as we just discussed, also an issue about translating the name of her institution. It is called Bundesstiftung Aufarbeitung, how to translate that into English. It is now the Federal Foundation for the Study of Communist Dictatorship in East Germany, which is a description, as some things are simply not translatable. She has been, she studied theoretical and applied linguistics, and has been working in the German historic museums at the memorial at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And since 2001, she is the director of this Bundesstiftung Aufarbeitung, much shorter than the English name. Our second guest is Professor Dr. Werner Konitzer. Professor Konitzer is the acting head of the Fritz Bauer Institute. Fritz Bauer played a major role in this German dealing with the past on the criminal justice level. He, apart from that, what you find in the publication, the Ulmer Einsatzgruppenprozess, he was the prosecutor who got going probably in the German history most important criminal trial, the Auschwitz trial in the 60s in Frankfurt. Some of you may have seen this year at least one of the 3 movies he had, which were shown about him. One of them was called The Maze of Silence, which is quite an enigmatic title about a certain part of the German experience of dealing with the past and of the German German past as such. Professor Konitzer studied Germanistics and Publicistics in Berlin. He has been teaching in Frankfurt philosophy and at the Viadrina University and in Frankfurt on the Oder. He is working since 2004 with the Fritz Bauer Institute, and since last year he is the acting director. May I ask you now, please, to join me on the podium. I would sit there as well and ask them a number of questions, hoping to engage them in a discussion. And I would be most happy if you would put questions to us as well, and if you would give your points of views on the issues that we discuss. Thank you very much. My first question is, Sanya Romeike is quite critical about transitional justice in Germany after 1945. She calls it no Ruhmesblatt. This is a glorious chapter, with probably the best translation. She refers mainly to lenient sentences, statutory limitations which limited the criminal justice process, and then acts of grace. When looking back, this was clearly bad for the victims, by far not enough retribution. But didn't the court cases as a whole change the political and historical narrative in the German society? Mrs. Romeike analyzed that the lustration process contributed a lot to changing this narrative. If yes, is this an example for others dealing with the past? Not the sentence matters, but the process and the revelations, the dealing with the facts.
I'd like to say something about the word Ruhmesblatt. I'm not quite sure about the translation of Ruhm. It's honor? No, it's something like honor. We have two types of honor. We have some, you can call 2 types of respect. We have some kind of respect which is appraising respect, which means if you are very good in football or something like this, you go on the first part of the, you go on the number 1 compared to the other. And this means appraisal, respect. We are very good in something. And the other kind of respect, I'm quite disturbed about the words now. The other is the normal respect we have, because we have to give everybody some kind of respect. And what happened in the past was a violation of the normal respect. And that means the restoration is something which is not what the philosophers call super-egoratorisch. It's not something very good if we punish someone who killed someone else. We don't have to say to ourselves, oh, that's quite good that we don't let him kill the other. No, we have to do this because we can't live without doing this. So the question of Ruhmesblatt is, the word is already wrong concerning what has to be done concerning the past about the Nazi crimes. To do nothing would have meant to take all hope of the human society. We have to understand this. So I would say, we can say, there happened something which was new in history. But on the other hand, there happened before something which was very new in history too. So the reactions have to do something with the extraordinary kind of these crimes. And this is my first point. So I would say her sentence about this is not very critical, but it's some kind of realistic. Yes, and this means we should think what would it have meant if nothing would have happened after this? What happened before? Nothing. And then we could imagine what kind of world we would live. So.
Same question? Yeah. Okay. You know, after 1990, there were one conviction that United Germany shouldn't commit for a second time the same mistakes like in dealing with the Nazi past in Germany. And so the process of dealing with Nazi past was some kind of a role model for coming to terms or dealing with a communist past in Germany. And the perspective was to not to repeat the mistakes of the first dealing with the past. So if I would judge coming to terms with the communist past in Germany, I would say we shortened the process of dealing with the past. But at the end, the results are very ambiguous. On one hand side, we had on a very early point the criminal processes against perpetrators. But the results of these processes, of the judgment, the sentences, were not very convincing, were not very convincing because we had 100,000 of investigations, but only more or less 1,000 processes at the courts, and only more or less 70 condemnations. So for the victims, this was not very satisfactory. They said, maybe you remember that very well-known phrase of one of the icons of the peaceful revolution of Bärbel Bohley. She said, we wanted justice, but what we got was a state of law. And this was a feeling of a lot of former victims. They hoped that they could get satisfaction by a state of law, but what they got was, yes, was what state of law could do. And then they hoped that they would get a better satisfaction by getting reparations for what they suffered. But even that process was a very long and painful, and even in humiliating process for a lot of victims, because even that in the first 4 years after the decline of communist dictatorship, a lot of laws for reparation and rehabilitation were verabschiedet, were passed, thank you. They had to fight for nearly everything. They got a capital compensation for having been in prison or in camps, but what they didn't get was a social recognition of what they suffered. And if they got health problems, they fight until today that these health problems are recognized as a consequence of persecution or kind of psychical torture in East German prisons. So for them, the process was much shorter than for coming to terms or for dealing with the Nazi past, but in the result, they are not satisfied by this process. But I would say the glass is not half empty, the glass is half full, and we have to do some more than we did, or we should try to reach more than we have reached in the last 26 years. But I would say, compared with coming to terms or with dealing with the Nazi past, we have reached a lot by dealing with the communist past.
And listening to your remarks, I mean, and coming back to the genesis of this publication, I mean, this request from a country which has hardly dealt with its past, as many countries, is there something that other countries can learn from both our experiences, or at least one of our experiences, which have a quite diverse background, in particular what the level of crimes is concerned, on the brutality and the enormity of crimes?
This is one of the questions, at least I think you too, when we have foreign delegations in our foundation in Berlin, or when I'm invited to conferences abroad. And this is normally one of the questions I am asked: what can we learn from the German model? And I don't really know the answer, because I can say what we did in Germany was more or less this, what for Germany maybe was the right thing. But when I'm looking on societies or states which had a civil war, I'm not sure if we can recommend what was done in Germany after 1990 at least. So I always recommend, try to open the files, try to give access to the documents, or at least if you can't give access to the documents, save the documents so that they can be open after 20 or 30 years to have evidence for crimes. Because not only in Germany, there is one basic conviction that what is not in the files is not really existing. So try to save the evidences in documents, but also in in places of torture, places of imprisonment, places of mass graves. Try to save these places so that you have some evidences. And then for Germany, it was the right way to have an open debate about what happened in the past, at least after 1990. I'm actually speaking about dealing with the communist past. But I would say it would have been good also to debate after World War II about what happened during Nazi time. And so I think it is good to debate about that. And when I compare that with a pact of silence in Spain, maybe it's good for the perpetrators not to be blamed, not to be named, but for the victims, it's not a solution. So I would say maybe these two lessons can be learned.
The question is somehow tricky, I think, because I would say, yes, you can learn a lot, but do you learn it from the Germans? That's a point I'm not quite sure about it. You can learn if you look at the story what happened. Yes, you can learn a lot for sure, but you can see how the institutions can change. That's important. You can see how the juridical processes, the trials, and so which possibility they have, which not. And so the whole discussions of transitional justice, I think everybody who's engaged in this academic discussion in the world will deal somehow also with Germany, so one can learn from it. But it's not like learning from the VW or the Mercedes production. That's not comparable to this kind of learning. So there's something strange in this question, because does it mean we have done this, we the Germans? Because if we look back, who did it? Who did it? Who made this? For example, one criteria of this book of moral repair I read is there mustn't be a second wound of the people who have been victims. When I look at the biographies of Jewish people in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, still up to Ignaz Bubis, his result was, I want to be buried in Israel, not in Germany. I'm not sure here. He had this after dealing with the past in huge discussions. He was sad and he was frustrated, and he didn't commit suicide, as did Peter Sondier, as did Paul Celan, as did the Wolf historians who tried to discuss with the Münchner Institute für Zeitgeschichte, and who were rejected as quite subjective in their opinions concerning the past. So these were their experiences, and these were this the Germans? No. In this way, not. So we can learn from that. We can learn from the German reaction also, but these reactions are very ambivalent if you look at them. If you look at we talked about the discussion about the Zwangsarbeiter, I'm not the forced labor in the 90s. It was still very, very difficult to get the huge concerns, the companies, to pay something. And the people died before. So, yeah, there happened something, and it was good what happened, and it's true, it doesn't happen in other countries, where it would be nice that something like this would happen. But of whom do we learn? First, we learn from the victims. Second, we learn from a kind of publicity. But I would say it's not only, in Germany, it's not only the German public sphere, but it's always a dialectic between the international public opinion and the German opinion. We have this in all discussions about dealing with the past, we have this dialectics. So we can learn, yeah, but from whom? Oh.
After the First World War, okay, there were some war crimes, but no mass murder or Holocaust crimes against humanity, etc. And during this, after the First World War, there was nothing to deal with the past, almost nothing. And the Ludendorffs and Hindenburgs were, they were determining the narrative in the society together with many others. And while after the Second World War, there was a maze of silence, but there was no pro-Nazi narrative.
Yes.
At least only a limited one. We are about the same generation, so we remember these sentences of
yes.
Not everything was bad, like the motorways. But that was it. That nobody really tried to defend the regime of the war. So was that linked? Was that linked to the criminal the court cases? This delegitimization of the old narrative of the.
The first was the Lost War. The Lost War. This was the real. Totally, and not to be misunderstanding, there was no possibility to misunderstand this, we have lost the war. I think this was the highest delegitimation of the Nazi crimes or the Nazi regime, because they said we will win the war, so they didn't, so they were, and now we start with and then it gets difficult, you know. I didn't hear only this about the highways, but we are the same age, I think. I also heard something as, if you look like this, we send you to the gas chambers. I heard it also. This was also possible in the 60s. Not everyone, but one could hear it. But that's not the main point. The main point is we have this would, now I forgot the name, Lübbe, described as kommunikatives Beschweigen, communicative silence. I think in the diagnosis, he's right. There was agreement of rejecting Nazi ideology in general, but nobody knew what this meant. Yes, that meant not the high political sentences, to utter these very known political sentences. But what we have to see, and this is something my research goes on, we have to see that a totalitarian system like the Nazis, they were very engaged in transforming the moral conscience of the whole society. This was some part of their intention. If we look in the 50s, for example, we have this study of the Frankfurt School on attitudes, and they didn't publish it because they said, "Oh, we don't want to publish this. It's so anti-democratic that we don't want the people to know this." Yeah. They made some general book on it, but they didn't publish the whole thing because it was too dangerous, they thought. So if we look at the attitudes, and this is something you see when you see the trials on euthanasia, the crimes on. People weren't afraid of their doctors, though they knew they were part in the program. They practiced still in some little towns in northern Germany or somewhere else, and people knew, oh, he did. They knew what they did, and they weren't afraid of them. So, would you go to a doctor you know who killed about 50,000 people? So, and this means, oh, he won't kill us. He's not against us. He's against someone else. And this means this basic solidarity. We have these parts of the Volksgemeinschaft, which, in my opinion, existed some years later. And I think all these people, also the very right-wing people, didn't stay the same. They changed. But this sphere of belonging to us, this stayed a long time. And you can see this in the discussions about the Nazi crimes. So when Weizsäcker, he made this speech in 1986, I think. It was 1986. It was the first time he talked of Befreiung. It was the first time. So you have to imagine this. And what you can read in the book of the guy who made the speeches for him was that he had one day a discussion with Weizsäcker not to end with asking to leave Hess free. To leave Hess free. Yes. Which is something you say, oh, this is some hard thing, yeah. But you see the ambivalence in this.
Looking at this discussion and at these statements, I mean, what does that mean about the narrative about the second German dictatorship? I mean, my impression that it is that a large part of the narrative, in particular in East Germany, is not really very critical outside the group of the victims. I recall the Unrechtsstaat, the not rule of law state debate, which went on in Germany a couple of years ago. Is that a negative development? And what are if you agree with this analysis or with this observation, what are the reasons for that? And do we have reasons to believe that this will change concerning the second German dictatorship over time, as well as it changed with the view on the Nazi past?
Very good question. For me, it's really astonishing that if you look at the year 1989 or 1990, there you have a great political and social and personal consensus about that the GDR was a communist dictatorship, that there were committed a lot of crimes in this country, that this was a Unrechtsstaat. A lot of people were convinced by that, and they protested against that. But what was really interesting that in between a very short period of 2 years, more or less, the nostalgia for the old regime grew up. And why? It didn't grow up because people were convinced that it was a better state, but their expectations and experiences in the democratic system were very different from what they expected and hoped. And so the past became nicer and nicer by remembering the social security in the GDR. There were no unemployment, and people compared that with the actual situation. And they forgot what they have feared during dictatorship, and what were the reasons they went on the places and protested against this regime. So the erosioning of the past, I would say, had nothing to do with the past, but had a lot to do with the present the people lived in the 90s. And we had a lot of public discussions all over Eastern Germany with people, and it was really interesting in the 90s because people, I'm coming from the East, I lived in the GDR, so I knew what people lived, and I also knew in the early 90s, I also lived this insecurity, this loss of all things you knew before, and this was a great shock for a lot of, for nearly most of the people, even if they were against the regime. Nobody of us was prepared for what happened after 1990. For us, all changed, and this is not imaginable, because our everyday life changed, all institutions changed, all rules and laws changed, and then people tried to remember, or they tried to defend their personal life. And they interpreted the change and the rejection of all what happened during socialist time as a discrimination of their personal lives. And so they tried to defend what they lived. I would give you a personal example. My family has a very special history because my father is from Sweden. He was a critical author. He wrote a book about the construction of the wall, and after this book, which is called The 13th of August, he was declared an enemy of state in Eastern Germany, so he couldn't enter anymore Eastern Germany. We couldn't leave Eastern Germany, so we were separated. I never knew my father, and he died before the wall came down. And my mother, as having been with an enemy of state, she was not allowed to work any longer in his profession. She was working in a publishing house as a lecturer, and she has to, I don't know what the word in English is, sie musste sich bewähren. She had to give proof that she is worse, yes. So she had to work for 4 years as a night guard in a hospital, having 2 little children. And afterwards, she tried to, because it was clear she was not allowed to leave Eastern Germany, and our father was not allowed to enter Eastern Germany, and so on. So after 19, and she was very happy when the wall came down. But in the first years after United Germany, when we discussed, she started to defend the GDR. And I was so astonished by that and surprised, and I said, but why are you defending this country which provoked such a lot of suffering to you, which destroyed your personal and professional plans? Why are you starting to defend that country? I couldn't understand that. Today, I understand that better. But I think this happened to a lot of people in Eastern Germany, that from a kind of feeling to be degraded and not acknowledged in what they they lived in this country, they couldn't differentiate between the system and the country they lived in. And in one television broadcast, this is one question is, what can we learn from the German process of dealing with the past? And the second question I'm every time getting is, please, Ms. Kaminsky, tell us one thing what was good in the GDR. Even at the beginning of the 1960s, when you asked people in surveys in Germany, a majority said Nazi system was a good system, but it was badly exercised. And in Eastern Germany, we have the same surveys. 10, 15 years, 20 years after the decline of the system, people say the socialist system is a good system, but it was bad realized in the GDR. So if you would repeat these surveys today, most of the people say, 80% more or less, say, no, the democratic system is a good system and our personal lives is very good. But there have been mistakes in discussing about the GDR. So
your perception is that, and you're much closer to it than I'm a Wessi, as we were called, that the narrative about the GDR past is about the dictatorship past is negative now in East Germany as well, predominantly.
Yes, I would say, but if you ask people about their personal lives, they will defend it. They will say, but we were happy and we had a good life, even that this was in a dictatorship. Yes. But if you are asking about the consequences, what we can see now in Eastern Germany, the Pegida demonstrations or other phenomenons on anti-democratic Erscheinungen, sorry, anti-democratic symptoms. I think this is a different kind of question, which we should face when we are talking about what is happening in after having overcame a dictatorship.
Mm-hmm. But looking at our academy's primary focus, the Nuremberg principles and the Nuremberg trials, the perception of these trials has varied a lot in these 70 years of history since then. You had at the very first a very positive reception, and this completely destroyed Germany. There was even big demonstrations here in front of the against the acquittal of Schacht, Fritzsche, and so on, where people demanded them to be sentenced as well. And the three prisoners didn't leave the prison for the first days because they feared that they might become victim of a lynching mob. And then after only a few years later, there were a big demonstration in Landshut, and the prison were all the prisoners from which had been sentenced by the American successive trials had been sentenced and partly hanged, that they should be pardoned. So a paradigmatic shift in opinion. And then after a long process with the Auschwitz trial, with then the Sobibor Majdanek trial, the serial on Holocaust in TV, etc. So there was the students' revolt in the late 60s. There was again a paradigmatic shift in the German society. If you can agree on this pattern, where are we on that? And as far as the discussion about the second German dictatorship is concerned,
the difference is that we had these processes are in a very early phase after the dictatorship. So the last processes ended in 2005, 15 years after. And at that time, a lot of knowledge we do have now, we didn't have at that time. So a lot of people were freed or didn't get a sentence because the evidences were not there. But now it is too late because the process has finished. So I don't think that for that what happened for the second dictatorship, we won't have this paradigmatic change because there's a lot of things are done which were not done on behalf of the first dictatorship. So what is open now, but I think even with that we are in a better status now compared with 26 years after end of World War II, is that even today a majority of German pupils are leaving school without having heard about communist dictatorship. And I don't blame the teachers, because with all these reforms of school systems, with the reduction of history lessons to 1 hour per week, the reduction of formerly 13 school years to 12 school years without having reduced content, what a teacher can do. He has only a limited time, and he has a huge of content to bring to the pupil. So he will look what is subject of the exams, and if post-war time, history of divided Germany, history of communist dictatorship in the eastern part is not subject for the exams, they won't teach that because they will concentrate on this, what is important for the exams, because they want that their pupils have good exams at the end. So actually we are engaged to bring the topic of communist dictatorship, German division, to schools, so that all pupils which are leaving schools can at least have heard that Germany was divided. Last year we celebrated 25 years of German unification, and when we had, for instance, when we had school classes in our foundation, sometimes they or when we asked them, what do you think about German unification? And then they thought over and what do you mean, 1871? Because they don't know that Germany was divided until 25 years before. And when they come to Berlin, or when you come to Berlin, you won't see anymore that the city was divided, and they are asking where was the wall, and they can't find that. And for them it is not imaginable that Germany was divided, that the capital was divided. So, and if they don't hear that in schools, there we have a lack, and maybe this would be a kind of paradigmatic change when we have new generations of young students which demand that they want to be taught about also this part of history.
Is there something, can the rules be derived from, these paradigmatic changes which took place over the 70 years after 1945, or is it extremely specific German?
I think normative, this is to this thinking about transitional justice, and it's good to that we have these discussions. This means we think generally about consequences coming from very high injustice in political or societal spheres, which is not some individual injustice, but crimes of whole societies. So we think about this, and this is good that we do this. I think, yeah, it's But on the other hand, we aren't able to say. We have to generalize it. It's like the comparing genocide research. But we can say, oh, how to deal in general with Holocausts. That's not possible. This is a very, very singular story, and we have to find it out what is the right still in this moment. We are not in something we have general rules to act with, what we should do now with this past. I think one very important thing is Hannah Arendt wrote in her study of the Germans. She wrote about the Germans who's sending postcards to each other with the pictures of cities which didn't exist anymore. So one very important point is to understand that happened what happened. That really happened what happened. This is something which has to do first. I would say Göring didn't understand what happened. So you have also to think morally about things to understand what happened. It's not only a descriptive thing to understand what happened, but also a normative thing. So therefore we have all these conflicts. We would say, okay, if Weizsäcker would have stopped his speech with let Hess free, then we would say, oh, he didn't really understand what happened up to this time. So realizing what happened is one very, very important point, and it's something normative and something descriptive, yes. But one thing which I found very wrong sometimes was the very strong impulse to say, oh, this shouldn't happen again in Germany. This was, they started also the left movement in the 60s. If somebody is killed, you don't say, oh, this shouldn't happen again, because individuals won't stand up again. Yeah? If there's a murder, you can say, oh, this shouldn't happen again. You can say you shouldn't murder anymore, but there's some guy who is killed, or some human being, and this can't happen again. And there's a lot of discussions in the 60s. For example, the whole student movement did discuss it in this manner, that it shouldn't happen again, without realizing that it happened. Yes? Therefore, the whole thinking about anti-Semitism of the victims started later. First, they talked about general structures, fascism, and this stuff. Yeah. I think one point concerning, I have one question to her. I get the impression that you, and this is my impression when I think about it, that in some way the victims of the GDR crimes were abandoned after 1991, 92. Or is this right? In a way, abandoned. They, for example, if I think at Biermann in the 90s, or at the Panach and Kunert, and Bettina Wegner, yeah, they were heroes in the West. Yeah, they had high sympathy, and this wasn't in that way. It disappeared in the 90s very, very fast. Also in the West. You understand what I think? Yeah.
I'm not sure that I have a good answer to that. But I think what we constated after 1990 very early is that there was a great effort to deal with the communist past. But at the same time, there was a great fear that by dealing with the communist past, the Nazi past would be diminished. So that all Germans would construct themselves as victims of the Nazi past, the Nazi dictatorship and the communist dictatorship, and victims of the division. And so what victims of the communist past constated very early was that they were always compared to the victims of Nazi past. And they felt like victims of second degree, second class victims, because they were always compared. For instance, I have lived a lot of these discussions that politicians from the West explain to the victims from the East that they shouldn't have to complain because the Jewish victims have suffered much more than them. And I think for a victim, you can't explain that. You have to acknowledge that what happened to every victim is the worst what happened to the individuals. But in a kind, I think it's a good observation that these victims disappeared a bit because. Yes. They got rehabilitation laws, but what they didn't get was social acknowledgement and estimation, because it was said it was not so harsh, and it was forgotten. It was forgotten that the brutality of terror in the Stalinistic period of post-Nazi Germany in the East wars with over 1,000 killed people. They were shot in Moscow, people in the camps, and they lived a lot of discrimination because nearly all people in the Soviet special camps were qualified as former Nazi people, even if even that in these camps were also people who were before in the concentration camps of the Nazis, or that democratic resistant people came to the Soviet camps. But yes, they were abandoned a bit, because it was said you got rehabilitation, keep quiet, you got compensation, and now be content with all that. And in a kind, I think they suffer until today of this lack of empathy, I would say. Yes. There were not a lot of empathy with them.
If I may extrapolate from this remark a question, what role in dealing with conflict and dealing with the past does this acknowledgement of guilt play? And is that can take a form of compensation of a criminal proceedings? It can also take the form of just acknowledging, asking for forgiveness. What role can the latter one play?
The guilt.
The acceptance of guilt for the victims.
It plays a big role, but I for sure it's
but what
very
is
important.
The cure? I mean, what is a cure for a society? We have been discussing that criminal justice, if at all, can be only a very small part of it. We look at for ICTY, the Yugoslavia Tribunal. It's more. Recently, after the Seychelles decisional, I read the sentence that in Bosnia, the ICTY justice was a continuation of the war with other means. So it obviously didn't cure the society.
Yes.
But what are ways to cure a society?
Yeah, but
be it in the case of the GDR.
In the case of the GDR, I think it is important that the people who were, that the trials weren't understood as the trials of the state, which was guilty. So this was a Western justice. So.
Maybe on one hand side, because it was also spoken, or these trials were called, it is Siegerjustiz, justice of the winners. But on the other hand side, if you look on the results of these trials, there were only 70 sentences for imprisonment. So for the victims, it was a great program of amnesty. Of giving amnesty to the former perpetrators, and a lot of former victims, they said, we can't be cured by that because there's nobody is responsible for that or guilty for that what happened, and this is a great disbalance. On one hand side, we have more or less 300,000 political prisoners, and on the other hand side, we have only a handful of people condemned to prison for the committed crimes. And the same people who at the beginning of these trials said, here the glorious West is doing victories, winners' victory here, they said, at the end of the trials, you can see that there weren't committed crimes because only a handful of people are condemned. So, in the GDR, there were not crimes, because if there would have been crimes, there would have been more condemnations. So by that, you can't get a cured society, at least for the victims. And on the other hand side, it was tried to organize perpetrator-victims conversations or meetings, and it was told, if we can't condemn the things what happened, then at least we can get an excuse from the former perpetrators, from the people responsible for that. But in most of the cases, it ended in a very unsatisfactory result for the victims, because only a few perpetrators were willing to confront themselves with the former victims. And if these meetings took place, most of the perpetrators tried to explain and to get absolution for what they did. So I think on behalf of the victims, it's not very satisfactory what they got.
At this point, before I come to another of my questions, I mean, there are here in our audience, there are people from quite a number of countries which have been going or are actually going through massive conflicts, from Albania to Greece to Syria to Colombia and others. Would you have any questions to the panel or any remarks you would like to make about our discussions or from the background of your own experience?
I have a question from Kenya. We had the post-election violence and people fighting. And then came the European Union and the international community, the United Nations and the US and all that. So they came up with a template of what we're supposed to do, like Truth Commission, write a new constitution, reparations, lustration. And then from the question of what do you learn from Germany? So to what extent is it practical to have a template of what you're supposed to do and the actual realities that can actually happen for countries in post-conflict? Like, it wasn't our own ways of dealing with the past. It was a normative framework from the UN, brought and supported by the EU and the US and the UN, as a framework that Kenya was supposed to follow, and then it backfired on us. So what's your reflection on this kind of normative framework that is given to post-conflict societies in the third world?
Yeah, do these kind of recipe books make sense for other countries? This is one we are, for instance, at the moment as an academy very actively following the discussions in the Central African Republic. This will be our second paper. And we start observing more intensively in South Sudan. And it's the similar recipe book. I mean, criminal justice, compensation, restitution, lustration, truth commissions. Does that make sense, this kind of recipe books? Ein Rezeptbuch.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. No, I don't think that that in this field there can't be given recipes for how to deal with the past, I think. Because even in Germany, it's a process of trial and error, and to look what works, and we only know that at the end if it works or not. But I think it's better than to do nothing.
I think the situations are quite different. I know a little bit about Rwanda and the conflict, which is a very special situation, and I think the situations are different. So I would say we have big difficulties to compare the two narratives in Germany also, because the most victims of the German genocide came from Middle and Eastern Europe. So what we talk about, we have to. It's in some framework which is maybe not the right. So, but we have, and therefore it's. I don't know. We have to compare the different countries and the different situations. For example, I would say in Colombia, the situation is quite different with the 30-year war behind. It's something else as our dealing with anti-Semitic traditions and so on. There are some general things one can ask about. And these general things, I would say, concern what is meant by moral repair or historical justice. And we have to develop it from the questions, what is necessary for the victims or the relatives of the victims to be able to live in a world again, with hope and trust. This is the criterion which is very relevant, I think, and we can ask this. So this question about what is the situation of the victims is very important. We have to think about their situation, because we can see what happened with the normative system from their point of view. If they can live again in this world, so there has something happened which is okay, I would say.
You wanted to compliment?
Yeah. No, I had the chance some years ago to assist in the first reconciliation conference in Chad, in the Republic of Chad. And when I was there, it came to my conscience for the first time that we in Germany, we have a very special situation, that the borderline between victims and perpetrators is relatively clear. We have the victims and we have the perpetrators. But when I was in Chad, for instance, then I noticed that you can't say this is a victim and this is a perpetrator, because during the civil war there, nearly everybody was a victim or could be a perpetrator, or and the borderline was very. It was not so clear like in Germany, so that former perpetrators could become victims 1 year later, and maybe then they took revenge for their relatives or for the victims they had in their tribe, and became again perpetrators. And I stood there and I said, oh my God, but how to deal with such a story where you don't have clear categories of victims and perpetrators? I don't know.
And if I may add also a reply to your question, I would reply first of all with a quote from Sanya Romeike, maybe the one I like best in her publication. She writes that to this day, the discussion about the Nazi past leads to controversies about the right way to deal with and interpret this past. This, however, is part of coming to terms with it too. This means for me that this, with reference to your question, that it's of course nonsense to produce recipe book, criminal trials, compensation, restitution, illustration, etc. But to inform about the experience of others and thus feed a discussion in a country which has to deal with the past and how to do that. I think this is a very good contribution, and that can help you in Kenya as well, because you see what kind of experience have been made in other countries and what can be useful for us. Not as a prescription.
But you can always think what would it mean if one of these points would not be there. That would be interesting. Yeah, if you see, we only make trials, but we make nothing about remembrance or something like this. So what would change it? Why do we do so? Because these recept books are something like people looking at different historical situations and picking up what happened. So there is some experience in it. Also, it's not completely wrong. It may be a little bit ridiculous if you look at like this, but these. This is also some experience in very different countries, I think, which is in it. So one have to ask what makes it as a whole picture. What is the sense of the whole picture that we do something like this? Yeah. So, and you can also say, what will happen if something like this doesn't happen? What does it mean that in Russia the archives are closed again? What does it mean that France didn't apologize for the crimes concerning Algeria? And so on. Yeah. What does it mean for the contemporary society? I would say it produces new violence. Yeah.
Yeah, what would have meant if Göring, Streicher, Rosenberg, and so on,
Yes.
would have spread their poison in the late 40s, in the 50s, all over Germany. What would that have meant for Germany, for our Western integration, for the reconciliation first with France? All things I can hardly imagine that they would have taken place, and they played an enormous role in this on this political side of transition in Germany. Are there more questions or remarks?
I think it's one important point about this this place. We wouldn't, if there was the option also. Churchill talked about it, and I think the Russians talked about it. Just shooting about 200,000 Nazis, not doing anything else. This was an option also in the discussion. And if this would have happened, we wouldn't talk about transitional justice now, I think. Because making a trial on it means to put it in the sphere, to put some parts of history in the sphere of morality and right. And this makes it possible to think about justice in this coping with the past. Yeah. And this, therefore, it was a very good decision.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Mariana.
Well, I'm from Albania, but I'm not going to talk about us using the German model because I don't think this will ever work. But you were talking earlier about mistakes in dealing with the past and learning from these mistakes of dealing with the past, and the Germany having the opportunity to have a second chance to deal with the post-totalitarian regimes. I don't like the dictatorship terminology. So I'd prefer better to talk about authoritarian regimes that speak more about a certain political system. And then coming out to the fact that transitional justice is actually a matter of choices, and these choices are made based on what the decision makers or stakeholders think are the best principles to follow at a certain moment in time, and then to choose certain mechanism or certain tools in order to achieve this principle and to balance these principles. And this is quite a hard task to balance the need for truth or need for accountability or need for reparation and compensation, all these needs this transitional society faces. And I don't know if actually when these choices were made here in Germany, and maybe you can enlighten us, were actually German people being asked about it? I don't know if the Allied forces actually asked German people, so if they wanted trials or not, or if they wanted anything else. In post-Nazi Germany, I believe that maybe more it is done in the post-GDR, but actually it comes to me as something very external to the society, not only to the victim, but also to the population in general. And is there a consensus about these choices? And if there is a consensus about it, what is the consensus? Or what are the mistakes you think that could have been done differently? Thank you.
Okay. First, the Allies didn't ask the Germans about this, and it's clear why. I think because they demonstrated before their high solidarity with the regime up to the last day. Yeah. So the problem was how to deal with crimes who were committed not only by a few, but by very, very many people in solidarity with other many people who were. You have to understand how how deep-rooted the National Socialism in Germany was. There were some kinds of resistance, and there were resistant acts, for example, against euthanasia, but no resistant acts, or very few against killing the Jews. So there was a high solidarity, and if they have asked about the trials, I would, the first trial, they would have agreed in a way, because they made the main guys responsible for the whole. But this was something also like scapegoats to take away the guilt of many other people. So they were aggressions against Göring, and so had something to do also with getting the guilt away from themselves. Later on, I think there were discussions about it, for example, and there were public discussions, but there was never some general question, how do you want to deal? For example, I think the commitments with Israel, there were public discussions, but there was no, how do you say, Volksabstimmung or something like this? No referendum about this. So, no, I think no. But, yeah. There was another question, no? I didn't get it.
No. The idea is you are talking about not doing the same mistakes. I mean, what are these mistakes you think has been done?
Did I talk about mistakes?
Earlier, you were referring to the idea of not having the chance to repeat the same mistakes again. And so I wanted to know what these mistakes were. How do you think this can serve to, the German public, German institutions, German society, also to other societies and so on?
Yeah, but for me, this word of mistake I have difficulties with it.
No, it was me who talked about that by dealing with the communist past, there were a huge conviction, a broad conviction that the mistakes made by dealing with the Nazi past shouldn't be repeated, by not having the trials, not speaking about this past, not having memory places for decades, not having opened the files, not having this documentation. So that's why dealing with the Communist Party started very, very early. Yeah. It started immediately. One of the first resolutions of the one and only free elected parliament of Eastern Germany in March 1990, even when the GDR already just existed. The first resolution of this parliament was to declare the responsibility of Eastern Germany for the Nazi crimes, which was the first time that in Eastern Germany government and parliament declared themselves responsible for that, because during all communist times the East German government and this so-called parliament, this pseudo-parliament, they rejected the responsibility to the West. They said all Nazi perpetrators and all Nazis have fled to the West. Here in Eastern Germany, we have all been in resistance, or at least victims, and a lot of people thought that Hitler was a West German guy, and It has nothing to do with East Germany. So this was very important that...
it was Austrian.
Yeah, but... they started very early to face the crimes and
yes.
also to face responsibility for Nazi crimes, which was for the first time in Eastern Germany that this was done.
You see, I think if you say this, we don't want to make the same mistakes in this sentence. You see how the victims are abandoned. This is a formula for this happening, because if you say, oh, sorry, we didn't, we made the supermarket at this place of the where former was a concentration camp. Sorry, it was a mistake. At this time when things like this happened, people didn't think about it as a mistake, and talking about it as a mistake wouldn't be possible. You know, for example, in the whole discussions with the victims. One wouldn't say, oh, this was a mistake, sorry. But a mistake is only, to talk about it of a mistake, a Fehler, is only possible in this comparison. First we did it wrong, and now we make it right. Yeah? This is only possible if you say, I do the same a second time. And if you talk about, at this point, doing the same a second time, you leave the victims. Yeah, because and what you complained about, this comparison always taking place, is already in this way to talk. Yeah, and this way to talk was the main way to talk about it from the beginning 90s. Yeah, before not. Yeah, Wegener and all these, they weren't compared with victims of Nazi time. Yeah, when Panach and Kuna and when the system still existed, there was no comparison like this. But at the moment when it broke down, there came the comparison, and with the comparison came the de-individualizing speech. Yeah, and this is very interesting, I think.
Are there other more questions?
My name is Darlene Said. I come from Kenya. I work with the Nuremberg Academy. You talked about a difference between Germans themselves having a public opinion about dealing with the past vis-a-vis the international public opinion. Do you think Germans themselves have accepted or have reached a point where they feel they have completely dealt with the past? That is my first question. And then my second question is, so we have different mechanisms for transitional justice. We have truth commissions, we have lustrations, we have memorialization, apology. If you look at countries, third world countries that are going through post-conflict, going through conflict or on post-conflict phase, some of them have gone through these transitional justice mechanisms. But it is not enough for someone to say that they have really dealt with the past. I'm looking, for example, at South Africa, which went through apartheid, and now recently there's a lot of social unease, having gone through the best truth commission in Africa and probably in the world, having created memorializations of the apartheid period. You cannot really say that they have dealt with the past. So based on the German experience, How do you think South Africa and these other countries can learn from? What experiences that can these other conflict countries learn from, so that the social unease, at least, or the political unease, can reduce to a level of where Germany is right now? And this, I think, is dependent on whether Germans themselves feel like they've dealt with the past. I don't know whether they have. Is it a generational thing? Because I consider dealing with the past a process and not just a one-time event. So, of course, the victims would want to deal with the past. The survivors would want to deal with the past. The children of the victims and the survivors would want to deal with the past. But is this also a generational question? Where would you say that we want to stop dealing with the past? Is it the grandchildren of the victims? Is it the great-grandchildren of the victims?
I'm not quite sure if I understood the whole question.
Well, one part of the question is, when is the dealing of the past enough, if I understood you correctly? I mean, are there limits when you can, or are there points where you can stop dealing with it? And the other part, as I understood your question, is there some coming back again to the modal question, if I understood you correctly?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Very difficult. First, I think there are very different aspects in this question. And we have a lot of discussions about it, and a part of these discussions, or a part of this discussion in Germany was started in what he described in 1950. Let's stop it. Let's stop it. Let's make an amnesty. Let's make no more trials about it. Let's forget the past. And so we have this discussion always from the 50s going on, and there's always someone saying, oh, it should come to an end now. But there are criteria also that something is going to an end, for sure. For example, it makes no... Therefore, for me, it's difficult, because I would say, we talked about this, there's always something in this process which we can call, oh, it's always a little bit too late. For example, the discussion of the professors of history involved in the process of occupying Soviet Union, and started when their pupils went out of their professorships. So in the 90s, when the people who had loyalty to their doctor fathers went also out of the university, then the discussion of the involvement started. A little bit too late, one would say. It's a little bit too late. The discussions about the forced labor started when they were dying. It's a little bit too late. We have this always. We can always say, oh, it's a little bit too late. Yeah. So what does this mean? It's also good that it happened. But there's something we can say, oh, there has something changed. Okay. No, I'm quite... there's another very important point, which was remarked by Adorno, I think, in his Erziehung after Auschwitz. He said, these crimes are very bad concerning the German national Nazism. And this is something which will exist as long as something like a German nation exists. So as long as we have political units like nations combined with names like Germany or something like this, or France, some cultural thick concepts, and someone feels as German with whatever this means, he will have to do with Germany did this. We often now find people talking about the national socialist crimes, but they were committed by a state named Germany. And always this is something which is like a wound in the self-image of Germans, I think. And Adorno said this, and he said, this will be dangerous, more dangerous when the people who committed the crimes will have died than before. So therefore, I think we have no end, and we see when national movements are coming up like now, the question is here again. Questions we thought, oh, they were over. Yeah. So you see it with the unification. Yeah, you see when the unification took place, up to this, the Germans said, oh, nation, it's not so important for us. Yeah? But when the unification took place, 2 years later, there was a huge right-wing movement coming up. We deal up to now with these Höckers and these other guys. So at this time, and there was one little story. You remember Ignaz Bubis? He had this discussion with Walser, very famous, about the German past. The history about it was Ignaz Bubis. You know, there were these pogroms in Rostock-Lichtenhagen. And there were some French Jews and gypsies going to Rostock-Lichtenhagen because there were gypsies have been attacked in Rostock-Lichtenhagen, and they made a placard on the civil building to remember this in 1993, or I think 1993. These people who made this placard were arrested by the police for one night after the pogroms. So the image of the town broke down, yeah. And the town council thought, what should we do? And they said, oh, we asked Ignaz Bubis if he could come here and say, this is not the whole Rostock-Lichtenhagen. And he did. And 3 years later, Walser made the speech and about the Germans not being so bad and not always being Nazis and so on, and don't want to have to be confronted with the past anymore. And the whole auditorium stood up, but not Bubis. And they had a discussion after this. In this discussion, Walser said, Bubis was the speaker of the Jews in Germany, yeah, and Walser said to him, why did you come to Rostock-Lichtenhagen? Why did you make this combination of this was happened and the German Nazi past? Yeah, so you see how these actual national movements always come to this Nazi past. Always, nearly automatically come back to this because of this Nazistic moment in this. Yeah, and even if someone like Bube says, "Oh, I want to say this something against it," he is in this picture. Oh, he wants to say we are guilty. Yeah, and this is very interesting. If you look at the whole story, you see how ghosts are standing up in this.
Frau Kaminsky, the crimes of the GDR dictatorship were of a different nature and much more comparable with the crimes that happened in other countries. So, how long is your foundation going to exist? No, this is a bad question. I've reformulated.
No. When it is allowed to have historical amnesia, I don't know that. I think every generation will decide that or discuss it from bottom on. And I think maybe on behalf of the communist dictatorship, it would become earlier than on behalf of the Nazi dictatorship. But what we have to face now is another challenge on behalf of historical education, because even that a more or less great part of Germans doesn't want that. Germany has become an immigration country, and I don't have this number in mind exactly, but I think that even today, more or less 50% of pupils in schools have a migration background. So if we teach them German history from the point of view of responsibility, a lot of them, they say we don't have to do nothing with German past. Our grandparents haven't been involved in these crimes. We come from Russia, we come from Iran, we come from elsewhere, I don't know, from Eritrea. What do we have to do with the crimes Germans committed 80 years before? And I think this will be the great challenge. How to transmit this responsibility for German history for young people who has a familiar background which has nothing to do with German history. I don't know that, but I think we will have these, and we have these discussions, and we have even another influence if we are looking on the part of Arab immigration with a very different point of view to anti-Semitism. And I think until today we don't have the recipes to deal with these new influences for historical education in Germany.
So, listening to that, what you both just said, it is very unclear how long, even when you look at it from a historical perspective, how long this discussion will go on. I would dare to forecast that the discussion about the GDR past will diminish as it is diminishing the communist past. The discussion about other dictatorships doesn't play a big role of the dictatorships in the 30s, for instance, and today's democratic countries doesn't play a big role in other countries as well. But due to the violation of our, call it national soul, or however, through the incredible crimes committed by Germans during our Nazi past, this will certainly last much longer and will, due to the enormity, be less of a model and less of a comparison, but still providing insights into a way a society has been dealing more or less successfully, but underlined has been dealing with it. I think this is also a good moment to thank you for participating so intensively in this discussion and feeding us your insights into these matters from your different point of views. This I really enjoyed sitting here and listening to you and putting you questions I had been thinking about for quite some time. And I think we're going to meet again and continue discussing at other occasions. Thanks also to the audience for questions and listening to us. The publication is there ready to grab on the table. Thank you very much, and I wish you a nice evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.